What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist News. Hopefully, y'all are doing well. Just wanted to drop a word or two on this whole Disney thing. The Disney search for boys and men of a certain age, at least as they tell it. And I want to drop a word or two on it. So we're going to go through the Variety article and just kind of look at what exactly they're trying to do, right? Sorry, I'm just trying to get this mic together. But anyway, so this is it. This is the article on Variety. Disney's Boy Trouble Studio seeks original IP to win back Gen Z men amid Marvel Lucasfilm struggles. Now, I'm going to say straight off, I'm not against original IPs. I know it's, kind of the trend right now to hate everything that's reboot oriented or whatever, but I don't think that's been the problem, really. It's not the reboots that are the issue. It's the approach, right? And we're going to get into a little more of that as we go. So let's just kind of delve through this a little bit. So this came out August 21st, 2025, of course, written by Matt Donnelly. And it reads, I'm going to skip past a little bit of the fluff and just get to it. So leadership at Walt Disney Studios has been pressing Hollywood creatives in recent months. Multiple sources tell Variety for movies that will bring young men back to the brand in a meaningful way. Young men is defined here by sources as ages 13 to 28, aka Gen Z. Now, this is already a bit of a problem in my book that you're targeting such a young demographic when you got millennials and Gen Xers that are happy to support some good quality content. So you don't even really have to alienate generations of men in that fashion. I get that they're targeting a young demographic for an extended long-term kind of benefit, but you didn't disrespect so many generations of men. You might just want to focus on men and just not try to delve it down quite that much. But anyway, every film studio is looking for better ways to convert young audiences into habitual moviegoers. Numerous studies show that Gen Z men in particular are a lonely, gaming-obsessed group who were hampered in their formative years by COVID-19 lockdowns. Not the easiest segment to grasp. Now, this is already a bad look. And Variety is not Disney, so I'm not necessarily saying that this is how Disney's framing things, but I do believe they are. I do. And so for the most part, you're starting off by insulting the demographic you want, which is the same problem the Democrats have. You're claiming you want male votes, but you don't know how to talk about men outside of insulting them. Whether you're subtly calling them, misogynists, or you're calling them game-obsessed, lonely incels, all of these things, not only is it insulting that you're choosing that terminology, but you're letting the audience know you really have no fundamental, respect for the people you claim to now want as customers again. And we haven't even gotten to the fact that you've actually spent decades alienating them in the first place. But the first attempt you make at trying to reclaim them, this is the culture. Now, again, I'm not saying Disney is saying this. So far, this is Variety, but it smacks of what the Democrats have been doing as well. It really kind of speaks to a larger culture of misandry, such a deep-seated hatred of men that even in your attempt to reacquire them, there's no genuine respect. You haven't even attempted to approach these young men with respect, treating them as human beings that actually have interests. So you're going to try to, cut them off at the pass and claim their interests and attract them back, but you have no respect for them. And if that's your approach, it's not going to ring true. See, this is why manga and anime are winning, because they actually respect their demographics. They respect men to the point that they take them seriously. So even if there was a room of anime creators laughing at men, particularly men in the West somewhere, we wouldn't know it. Because as long as what makes the screen or the page, demonstrates that respect, that's really what matters. But it's going to come out in the work at some point if you don't respect them. So, why you start like this, I have no idea, but this is not a good look. What surprises producers, writers, and other partners in the larger industry is that Disney has been calling for original concepts to lure the demo back to the movies. Like I said, original concepts, there's nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't have to be original concepts necessarily. It just all has to do with the approach. And if y'all keep with this gynocentric approach to things, I don't care if it's new or the 80th reboot of Superman, it's still not going to work. This is the same Disney. And by the way, I don't think that James Gunn's approach was particularly gynocentric. We can argue back and forth about which Superman was the most masculine, but Gunn didn't do what Marvel's doing or what Lucasfilm's doing. So it's a step in the right direction. How much so is the debate. But anyway, this is the same Disney whose multi-billion-dollar content engines, Marvel and Lucasfilm, have sated men of all ages over almost 2 decades since the company acquired them. The sources say Disney has been seeking new IPs and pitches, such as splashy global adventures and treasure hunts, as well as seasonal fare-like films for the Halloween corridor. The calls come as the Star Wars machine struggles to produce any film project, and the superhero genre sheds audiences by the minute. Yeah, because you don't respect your demographic. That's what it is. And it oozes out of everything you create. You have to change the culture in the company. And because you're starting at the top when it comes to Disney, you got to get rid of the big boys. You got to get rid of the Feiges and all of that. It is what it is. The culture starts at the top. And they've spent so long creating that culture. You can't just replace the people at the bottom, the writers and the artists and even the actors. You can't replace them, but still maintain the same culture of misandry. It doesn't work. It's not going to work. It's not at least in any believable way. While 2 insiders say the mandate to recruit young males goes as high as the C-suite, the task primarily has fallen on David Greenbaum, the former Searchlight Pictures co-head brought on in 2024 to run Disney's live-action film business. That label has been sorely lacking in guy-leaning fare like the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise for nearly 10 years. Studio insiders say the property is in active development, though not in its last reported iteration involving Margot Robbie. Now, look, here's the thing. Even this article is tap dancing around it. And even though Disney said they wanted boys, nobody in those spaces wants to tell the truth. They don't want to come out and just admit that they alienated their boys on purpose. It was a failed marketing approach, and it was rooted in misandry and disrespect. And more to the point, the culture of the company, as well as the mainstream, reflects this, and it's only caused problems. When you bring up, Pirates of the Caribbean in an article about Disney trying to reacquire boys, but you don't mention the heart of the problem, it speaks to your dishonesty. It's disingenuous. The heart of the problem is you all alienated Johnny Depp, who was the core of the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, simply because his wife said something. His wife, accused him of something. And the accusation in the court of public opinion is, traditionally speaking, gold. It's the end. The accusation is, as far as people are concerned, the truth. Now with Depp, it took him some time, but when he was finally able to prove that the accusations were false, you guys were standing there with egg on your face. And I still haven't seen a quality apology, not only made to Johnny Depp, but in some way from the society to men that spent so much time elevating women and calling men toxic. You never actually acknowledge that there are women that manipulate public opinion for their own purposes, and there are innocent men. You kind of subtly suggest that there's, this small, infinitesimal percentage of men that are innocent, and anytime a woman says something, it must be true. The culture of that alone is such a problem. But this is why you're dealing with what you're dealing with. So you can go get, 100 male actors to play in Pirates of the Caribbean and still not regain the height of the franchise, because at the fundamental level, you didn't even apologize. In other words, if you really want to reacquire men, you first have to show you respect them. And based on the history of what's happened, you got to start by acknowledging not just that you fucked up, but that you owe these men an apology in some form or fashion. That's the starting point. Now, it doesn't have to be a word-for-word apology by the head of Disney, although that wouldn't hurt things, but you have to demonstrate the apology in your work. So you can't just kick Johnny Depp out and then suddenly try to get him back in to get more men in the theater without acknowledging that y'all contributed to this. And the same for Jonathan Majors. You treated men like monsters, and when women turned out to be monsters, you ignored it. And then you turned around and said, well, for profit's sake, we want more boys and men. That's not enough. That's not enough. There needs to be an apology. There needs to be an acknowledgement, and there needs to be, before there's any moving forward, there needs to be an acknowledgement that this has taken place and it won't happen again. And the reason it won't happen again is because we understand that what we did was fundamentally wrong. And we alienated and dehumanized a significant, if not half, the population of the fucking country by treating all men as monsters and teaching at least 2 to 3 generations of young men that that's all they could ever be. Monsters. But if they're allies to women or LGBTs, then, then they're somewhat acceptable, but only if they apologize for their masculinity at every turn. The culture of that is just not going to work. So continuing, to say nothing of the lackluster attempt to reboot and hand off Indiana Jones in 2023, which earned, look, before you even start talking about how much it earned, I don't give a fuck. And just glossing over what happened with Indiana Jones as a handoff that's the tap dance that people are sick of. And the truest apology is the apology where you at least come out and state, unequivocally what you've done. You disrespected a character that so many people liked, and the actor himself, Harrison Ford, by putting him in his own film, a film that they've been building up since the 80s, disrespecting the man and handing it off to someone we never heard of before. In such a, it was such a ham-handed, it was horrible. But you have to treat each of these occurrences, from Johnny Depp to Indiana Jones, as an offense worthy of an apology, because it was much bigger than the individual characters. It was an indictment against men, straight men. It was done without apology. It was done without nuance. It was done without substance. It was just across the board disrespect. Disney is acting like the wife that cheated on her husband, kicked him out, took half his shit, and then turned around and said, you know what? I want him back because he at least pays the bills. No apology, nothing. And that's just not going to work, especially for a generation of young men that have spent the last few decades finding other interests and engaging them. Unapologetically, I might add, which I applaud. So to bring up Indiana Jones in this is such a disrespectful gesture without coming out and saying what you did. You didn't just hand off a brand that this man, Harrison Ford, has been building up for decades. You disrespected him and men in your gesture to do so. Your gesture to prove that women were smarter, better, more capable, X, Y, and Z. And there's so many properties that fall into this, from animated shows and movies to live action. I mean, this was done on such a wide scale. The apology needs to fit the expanse of the crime. So you need to apologize on a wide scale by not only, saying so, ideally, but demonstrating that you understand what you did wrong. And if you can't even say it in an article, you're not going to generate any confidence in men that you even understand what you did. It says, a Disney source says that movies for Gen Z men are part of an overall strategy across all labels, but no more urgent than any other quadrant. Greenbaum recently hired Daria Churchick, I don't know, Kirchick, whatever. The savvy former Paramount Pictures co-chief to assist in this effort. Greenbaum is beloved by talent, but has largely existed in the prestige indie sphere, while Kirchick shepherded films from franchises like Sonic the Hedgehog, A Quiet Place, and Smile. Something to push for this demographic is simply Greenbaum trying to put his stamp on live action. Yet numerous power players who spoke with Variety see something ominous in the tea leaves. When the execution is correct, Disney's sweet spot at the movies has been millennials. That generation rapidly consumed classic vault titles like The Lion King, 101 Dalmatians, and Lilo and Stitch as kids. Now they bring their children in droves to see live action reboots. This year's billion-dollar grosser, Lilo and Stitch over-indexed with men and boys. Who do you think hit millennials to this shit? And they're still bringing back properties from Gen X's time period. They're working on a new live-action He-Man movie. Look, you guys are ignoring Gen X, I think, is a bad move. But if you're going to focus on millennials, you cannot keep sidestepping manhood, masculinity. You're talking about The Lion King, 101 Dalmatians, Lilo and Stitch. All of these brands, these properties that they're bringing up are so suspect. They're so on the line. They're designed to appeal more to girls than boys, because what they're afraid of is, in a way, recreating the manosphere in Disney. This is what I think they fear. So they want to lean to these properties that downplay, any kind of masculinity. I mean, The Lion King, you got a shot at making some commentary there about masculinity, but 101 Dalmatians? Really? That's the property you bring up when talking about trying to attract millennial men back to, come on, stop it. Lilo and Stitch, really? This is not looking good. Built-in interest is not nearly as guaranteed for such an audience, which propelled Warner Brothers, a Minecraft movie, to nearly $1 billion haul. That was a game Gen Z played as very small kids. Yeah, my son didn't even dig it. I mean, it just was so nonsensical. I had no desire to see that mess. But, you know, if it generates a profit, it's going to, you know, they're going to keep doing it. I'm going to skip some of this here. Some of this I'm not really interested in. I think there was something else, though, I did want to address. Yeah. See, when you're talking about properties like Zootopia, it just looks to me that you're looking for anything that's not going to really push any kind of unapologetic manhood. And I think that's one of the reasons you keep losing these various audiences. But when Fortnite and what is this, Minecraft do well, that's the direction they're going to keep going in. Not only because it generates resources, but you don't have a strong clamoring for any kind of manhood. And they like that. They want to keep it on that line. They love to do Barbie on one end, but the other end, especially as it relates to manhood, as far as they're concerned, is Minecraft, right? But they don't have to deal, or 101 Dalmatian, they don't have to deal with straight manhood. But that's the fundamental problem, especially when you talk about Marvel and Star Wars. You can't play that on the line game with those kind of major properties if you want that kind of massive appeal that they both used to have. So I'm not going to go back through all of this, or I'm not going to go through all of it, because some of it is just really losing my patience. Fantastic Four is one of those properties that lost a lot of respect because they were afraid to delve into manhood. So you choose someone like Pedro Pascal, not the most masculine performance of Reed Richards I'd ever seen. Just really lackluster in certain respects, barely used his powers, fixated a lot on Sue and the female Silver Surfer. And I know they cut out a lot, but it still leaned, highly feminine in that respect. Boys don't want to see that. They don't. So if you're going to be too afraid to push that envelope, you're going to keep producing lackluster films. The Mandalorian did really well until you tried to replace the main character with Bo-Katan, who a lot of people liked as a character in the Star Wars world, but I said this when it happened. Give her own damn show. You don't need to give her the Mandalorian. Give her her own show and leave it at that. Mandalorian was doing just fine. So y'all jacked it up by trying to hand the property over to somebody else. So anyway, these are some of the things that bother me. But what do I want to say about most of this? First of all, you got to acknowledge the systemic misandry as part of this issue. And until they're willing to do so, it's not going to work well. That's part of the problem right there. You got to acknowledge it, because here's the thing. When it comes to media, it wasn't just about Disney and Marvel. They're trying to make it such because these companies are trying to pull themselves out of a grave. But in order to do so properly, part of the apology is acknowledging the scale of the problem. It's not just about your properties particularly. This misandric culture of hating men and downplaying anything masculine went way beyond Disney and way beyond Marvel. It was the zeitgeist of the culture. And it needs to be treated as the virus that it was on that scale. And you got to talk about it like that, because it wasn't just, mainstream tentpole movies in the summer. It was schools, it was employment, it was education, it was politics, it was, the dating culture, especially as, supported by social media. All of this went gynocentric. This idea that men were toxic monsters permeated all of those different areas. And you see it in the actual data, not just the numbers of tickets sold for major movies, but you saw it in the graduation rates, K through 12, of boys compared to girls. The percentage of male teachers to female teachers, particularly on the younger ages, the younger grades, the lower grades, I should say, right? You see it in the evidence of that. Where are young men in the employment dynamic? Where do they find themselves? Where are they in regard to higher education? What fields are they moving into? These massive shifts in what's been going on with men. You can't tap dance around and just say you want to make a movie to get back customers. You have to acknowledge the culture you created and help create but it was a pretty significant helping. I mean, Disney and Marvel are major properties, and they went a long way to help permeate this culture of disrespect and hatred toward men and boys. So you need to treat the problem on the scale that you caused it. You need to address the wide scale impact of the work that you all have been trying to do to eliminate men. If you want men to come back to the table, this is what you have to do. And I'm afraid you can't separate the masculinity you don't like and just completely excise it out of the question. And then at the same time, turn around and tell them that the best they can do, this is what Obama and Michelle were talking about in that last show a few weeks ago. The best you can do is give them gay mentors. In other words, you're trying to manicure masculinity in some fashion that's more female friendly in terms of how women interpret and perceive manhood, while at the same time telling men that it's sexist for them to shape and determine womanhood. So you want women to define womanhood, and then you want women to define manhood. And the only types of manhood you find acceptable are those that, fall under the aegis of female rule, guidance, right? Direction. Whether it's through LGBT, which we know is just generally female leaning, because they don't even talk about LGBT that aren't female leaning in some form or fashion. The closest you get to that is, trans males, but fundamentally, biologically, they're still female. Right? So we only pay attention to the LGBT that's female leaning. And then we turn that against all forms of traditional straight masculinity. And we identify masculinity as the problem. And this doesn't work. You can't indict all men and males and suggest they're evil and then tell them that they're only acceptable if they fall within the framework of whatever brand you choose that has no masculinity in it. Last time I watched 101 Dalmatians, I don't remember anything masculine about it. But these are the examples you bring up on what you're trying to do to lure men. See, what you're really trying to do is not lure men. You're trying to shape men into something that, for the most part, is appeasing to these gynocrats. And it's not going to work. Even for people that aren't listening to the manosphere, they're not reading Black male studies, it's still not going to work. Because these boys have cut themselves off and they have their own interests that have nothing to do with the politics of what you're trying to sell them. It's tamped down manhood that you don't want to turn into a brush fire to revigorate any kind of real sense or identity of manhood beyond what you're comfortable with. That whole tap dance game that you guys are doing to keep the representations of manhood light, they're not dealing with none of that. They're entertaining themselves in a whole different space. And if you want them back, you're going to have to ask for them to come back on their terms, not yours. And that to me is the fundamental issue here. Whether you're talking about politics and the Democratic Party, whether you're talking about Disney or Marvel, you want to invite boys back and men back on your terms. And then you want to turn around and claim you don't understand why it's such a lackluster kind of performance when it hits the box office. You're going to have to actually venture into these spaces and attract them back on their terms. And a lot of people aren't going to like the kind of projects that are going to come out, at least for a while, on that front. But when the pendulum swings back, this is what you got to do. You got to delve into manhood, not run away from it. And you can do so honorably by bringing up the best qualities of manhood. But the problem is, since you fundamentally think men are monsters, the industries only look at manhood in terms of, this Manichaean framework. You're either all monsters or you're invisible and not present. So in order to get you back, we have to create some kind of feminine masculinity that appeals to our sensibilities and then create this space and tell you this is the only way you can fit into it in order for us to acknowledge you. It's not going to work. And then you're going to turn around and blame the men that it doesn't work, as opposed to actually acknowledging how you've been dehumanizing them, alienating them, and ignoring them, while telling them at the same time, as well as yourselves, that they're nothing but monsters. It's not going to work. Everything has to change to make room for men. The dating culture that's so female-centered, the TV shows and movies that pedestalize dating and mating and marriage culture has to change. Right? All of it is so gynocentric. All of it has to change. Mainstream popular cultures infatuation with feminine masculinity has to change, right? Because we're constantly being told that it is a better masculinity that has been feminized, and to, attack anyone that makes such an argument. But that's rooted in a vilification of manhood on its own terms to such a degree that men have opted out of the discussion. And these people think they've won the discussion because men have opted out. No, men are just tired of hearing you gaslight them. So they've created their own spaces. You're going to have to do a lot to get them back, because this has been decades in the making. As long as it's been decades in the making, you're going to have to actually invest some time to get them back. It's not going to be quick. It's not going to happen fast, especially if all you guys are talking about is Lilo and Stitch. Yeah, please. Or Minecraft. If that's your approach, it's not going to work. I think if anything, it's created what I consider a very cold rage in young men. A cold rage. And it's not coming out in terms of people burning down society. They're not protesting in the streets the way women normally would. They just pulled out, opted out, and they put their interests and resources in other areas. And you're going to have to do more than these insulting gestures to get them back. You actually have to listen to what they're talking about, invest in what they're talking about. Put the same energy into this that you did when you were trying to attract feminists. In the 1970s, when women entered the workforce and literally doubled the size of it, industry had to tap into what women wanted in order to figure out how to sell to them. They made movies about it. I forget the Mel Gibson one, where he could hear all women's thoughts, right? If you go back and watch that movie, he worked for an ad company, and they were in there trying to figure out how to sell to women. And that one of the big arguments in the movie was all these male ad execs could not figure out how to sell to women. And the big push that they kept making was that women are human beings with their own interests, and you have to invest in them to understand how to sell to them, because they have their own interests. They're not just men in skirts, they're women. Well, guess what? Now you got to do the same. Because since that time, you spent so much time vilifying men and boys, you no longer understand them, and they've checked out. So you're going to have to invest the same degree of interest in getting them back that you did in trying to get women to the table. That's going to be part of the dynamic right there. As long as they've moved on, it is what it is. But as long as you don't care, and as long as you've invested in vilifying them in reality as well as on film, it's not going to work. So the Johnny Depps, the Jonathan Majors, these guys have kicked the door open. Hell, even Christian Coleman. Evidence has shown that men are not monsters, and women can be monsters just as often. They just use a different set of techniques based on what's available to them, but it's just as monstrous. So you got to figure out what to do. And this approach so far, I'm not impressed by. But anyway, I look forward to hearing you guys' thoughts in the comment section. Let me know what I missed. Let me know what you think needs to be happening, and I'll holler at y'all later. Peace.